In legal sphere, Trump's already doing purges that I think if Stalin in his grave is informed by it, he has permanent orgasms. If anything, we are not enough pessimists. The opposite of what Donald Trump is claiming, this is the greatest scam, there is no global warming. I think the situation we are approaching now is really radical change, much more radical than we can even imagine. Our entire way of life will have to be changed.
But one of the narratives that I've been worried about is that AI will be used as a tool of suppression, whether through surveillance or policing or military efforts.
First, why are you talking about, I'm afraid that it will be? Isn't it that it already is, as far as we know?
I know that your new book, Quantum History, a new materialist philosophy, it's coming out on November 13th, so probably a month or so. Actually, maybe just like 2 weeks after this episode comes out. So I'm torn between starting off by asking you about that or the many recent crazy political events that have been going on.
Let's go to crazy political events, because for me, what attracts me so much in quantum mechanics is that it is as if offers the only conceptual coordinates that I know, which enable us to grasp the inner logic of the madness that is going on today. I'm especially focusing here on what I find in quantum mechanics and in a guy whom I appreciate very much. He must even live close to you. I mention him often, Jean-Pierre Dupuy, the top theorist of catastrophes, who elaborated this logic of something happens contingently, and by taking place, it retroactively creates its own necessity. It appears necessary. It's not as eccentric as it sounds. My big example, although I'm very critical of Marx, would be here Marx's notion of capital. You know, Marx says, that's the crucial point for me, from which we can learn. Marx, a lot today, Marx says that he uses a very problematic metaphor. He says that, like the anatomy of a man provides the key to the anatomy of the ape, in the same way, the anatomy of capitalism provides the key to the anatomy of all previous so-called more primitive modes of production. Now, this may sound like teleology, you know. All history was moving towards this point, but Marx's point is exactly the opposite one. It is that capitalism is a totally contingent event. It didn't happen in Europe because it was more progressive and so on. It was a whole series, Marx enumerates them, of contingencies, like the crisis of specific form of the crisis of feudalism, discovery of gold in Latin America, and so on and so on. But his point is that once capitalism is here, we cannot but read all that led to it as precisely something that necessarily led to it. You know who is, did you maybe make, when he was still alive, David Graeber, did you make an interview with him?
No, he died.
Because, yeah, his idea is the same. He takes, for example, the case of Inca civilization. What we know about it, only this dark side, human sacrifices, religious terror, and so on and so on. But he quite convincingly points out that that at the same time there was a strong decentralized tendency of horizontal links and so on. There was a struggle between, or as I would put it in quantum mechanics terms, a superposition of more options, and quite contingently this, let's call it oppressive option one. So this is for me the key for what is happening today. We are in such an open situation. I don't believe either Marxist or conservative or liberal interpreters who think that today's game may appear complex, but behind it there is a certain logic and so on. It's clear who will win. No, I think the situation is genuinely open, and this makes it all the more terrifying. So again, that's my paradox. My obsession with quantum mechanics is because it, I think, provides the basic conceptual structure, or even, I'm ready to make a step further, the structure of reality, which makes our crazy contingent world possible. We live in crazy times, and we should ask ourselves, how is this possible that we live in such a time? Because till now we had either this medieval or pre-modern circular time. You know that before feudalism, although with the beginning of Christianity there was already a notion of progress, but before capitalism, with feudalism, early ancient Greeks, they didn't have a notion of progress. Just life goes on, there are ups and downs and so on. So we have this circular notion. At the same time, with enlightenment, we have the notion of progress. What we get today, I think, is neither of the two. We are really approaching a crazy world. And please allow me to finish with one detail that I really appreciate. I read recently a very good ecological analysis, which, for me at least, convincingly demonstrates how, if anything, we are not enough pessimists, the opposite of what Donald Trump is claiming. This is the greatest scam, there is no global warming. In what sense? Even those who are pessimist and operate with numbers, like if temperature rise more than, 2-3 degrees Celsius or whatever, and then you have this popular max, which coastal city will be underwater and so on. In what sense this is still too optimist? Because the idea is still that till now we were living, there were earthquake storms, but basically, we lived in a certain relatively stably ordered natural world. There was winter, spring, summer, whatever, change of seasons. And the idea of this, let's call them 2 or 3% Celsius higher temperatures pessimists, is that, there will be a change and then there will be a new stability at a level which will be more dangerous for us, but still, we will find a way. We will lose some towns, we will maybe move towards Greenland, north of Canada, it doesn't matter, or even a new ice age if the Gulf Stream gets perturbed, a new ice age in Western Europe, but nonetheless, from the old to a new stability. But more and more, scientists are convinced that we are now approaching a chaotic nature which will not reach a new stability. It may be that there will be average higher temperatures, but not only this, not only warmer summers, but it may be years without summer. It may be cold age. It may be the opposite. It may be much more chaotic. That's the view I tend to, in a very sad way, accept. That the true danger is not a new stability which will be worse, warmer temperatures and so on. That the very notion of regular seasons will have to be abandoned. What this means for our way of life, we know. Just to give the people in my typical confused way an idea, I think that the situation where I'm aiming at, I think the situation we are approaching now is really a radical change, much more radical than we can even imagine, that our entire way of life will have to be changed. It's not this easy solution of Trumpian populists and others who even some leftists, many leftists claim that even a guy who was for a long time my supporter, maybe you heard about him, now he turned against me, Fabio Vighi, intelligent guy. But his idea is that all the crises that we are experiencing, or that are, as he prefers to put it, constructed, presented to us in the media, COVID, economic problems, name them, even now war in Ukraine, military problems, are well-planned strategies of the big capital to put pressure on the, let's use the old-fashioned term, working class, to keep the wages lower, to make profits higher, and so on, the usual story. So the idea is that for him, all this big crisis, even artificial intelligence, it can take over, then ecology, whatever, war in Europe, that it's just an artificially created invention to keep the population under control. So it's interesting that even the leftists have this optimist version. For me, this idea again is all too optimist. Just think about COVID. If COVID was really a well-planned invention, artificial operation, it was all planned just to keep people under control. If this is true, it presupposes something which is for me too much. It presupposes that, in spite of all conflicts, Western capital, United States, Western Europe, big corporations, and Chinese corporations and financial capital are all secretly coordinated to put it in vulgar terms, to screw the working class. This is, for me, too much of a conspiracy theory. This idea that all the crises we have are just part of some global plan of the evil guys. I don't think even that today there is one clear figure of an evil guy. Even here, things are dispersed. We really live in times, here comes again a reference to quantum mechanics, times which are not only impenetrable for us observers caught in the events, I think they are chaotic in themselves. Namely, what do I mean by this? It's a well-known joke. Even Jacques Lacan, my psychoanalytic teacher, uses it. He likes to speak about savoir dans le réel, knowledge in the real, like it's ironically meant. For example, all those famous Newton experiments, you throw the apple, how it falls down. It is as if nature knows its own laws, its own rules. My idea is, no, it doesn't know them. These rules themselves are contingent, can be changing, and so on and so on. And this, incidentally, I follow this debate slowly, is the latest result of quantum, not only mechanics, but also cosmology investigation, or maybe one should be more careful, speculations, that the laws of nature are themselves contingent, in the sense that at the beginning it was Big Bang or there was no beginning, doesn't matter, but at some point there was an evolutionary struggle between different possible laws of nature. And it's quite contingent that what we perceive today as the basic laws of nature emerged in a contingent way. This is why, again, I think we today more than ever need philosophy. Because in such a time of confusion, radical confusion, confusion where it's not only we don't understand what is happening, we don't even know which conceptual background we should use to analyze what is happening. Here, philosophy enters. So, to conclude with a wonderful joke used by Alain Badiou, you know who is for me really the first philosopher? It is Socrates, not Democritus and those early materialists. Why? Because the early materialists still had this basically pre-philosophical vision of reality. The world is out there, let's try and know it, and then you speculate. I don't know which one. Was it Thales said? Water, not earth. Water is the basic element. Everybody with water. For Heraclitus is not so much fire as struggle and so on. But Socrates does something different. He turns his gaze inward towards ourselves. What are we talking about? What do the very terms mean? He doesn't simply ask how the world real is. He asks what is reality, what is the world, and so on, which is why, again, the best definition of philosophy, I follow Alain Badiou, is that the goal of philosophy is to corrupt the youth. And they were quite right, to sentence Socrates to death. By corrupting the youth, I simply mean, of course, in a positive way, to make you doubt the basic presuppositions, conceptual structures of what goes on. And if I may go on very briefly, don't be afraid, people should listen to this. If you want to get a basic orientation of where we are today, I propose to people, I was so shocked when, for some other reason, I was reading the first pages just of what is maybe the best known or the first mega work in the history of philosophy, Plato's Republic, Politeia or State, however you translate it. And I noticed before even the proper debate happens, there is a wonderful dialogue between Socrates and, doesn't matter, I don't want to complicate it, some other guys, where these other guys talk there and Socrates is going somewhere away of them. And Socrates invites them, come with me. The others say, no, we want to stay here. We are more people than you. And Socrates says, but let's argue. I will try to convince you why it is important for you to come with me. And the other guy, I forgot which one, answers very simply. But what if we don't listen to you? What if we don't even listen to your arguments? Isn't this the situation today quite often with Russia, with Israel, also with some Arabs, with Trump and so on? Did you notice how often this new leaders, master figures, they don't really debate. They simply refuse to listen. Or, as you can read in Plato's Republic, a page or two later, a guy who is obviously an opponent of Socrates said, what is justice? Justice is simply the right of the one who is stronger to impose his will as the general one. And I think when Trump celebrates his art of stopping the wars, Trump as the big peacemaker, he secretly relies precisely on this notion of justice. Trump doesn't think in these coordinates. It's obvious who has more justice, who is more right. No, his idea is simply, it's clear. For example, this is the relationship of forces. Okay, I have more sympathy towards Israel, but I made a deal with big Arab states, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Egypt, and so on, and they are stronger than Palestinians, so I see a possibility of a resolution where who cares about Palestinians? Nobody even asks them. It's just you calculate the power, the strength of partners. The notion of justice is simply reduced to it. So where are we today at the very, just before the beginning of philosophy, as it were? I talk too much, please go on.
Well, there's a lot there. I'd love to start, though, by going right back to the beginning to make sure that I have grasped like the basic premise. So people believe erroneously that Marx viewed history as marching forward with a very particular direction, but you're viewing history as being much more contingent in a way that's analogous to the indeterminacy that a lot of people think is integral to quantum mechanics. And you can see that both looking at how history progressed, but also when you look around today, the indeterminacy is becoming much more apparent.
Yeah, I agree with you, but it's not just indeterminacy. We had all the time philosophers who advocated contingency. For example, the early materialists, Democritus, Epicurus, and so on, they already had this. But what is, for me, crucial is this dialectical, and I use this term in a very precise technical sense now, dialectical moment where something happens contingently and all of a sudden this contingency establishes itself as necessity. Something happens and, as it were, creates the reasons for its necessity. This is one of the aspects of the view of Marx, because I am also critical of Marx here. It is obvious that Marx oscillates here. In many of his texts, he is pure, in a bad sense, Enlightenment progressist. His idea is, he even uses, his idea is that modes of production, so-called primitive societies, the ancient Asiatic despotism, slavery, feudalism, capital, that these are progressive modes of production, and that they will reach its peak with, I don't want even to name it, whatever we call it, Marx oscillated here, socialism, communism, whatever you want. I think that Marx himself oscillated here. He got seduced by this image, but then in particular analysis, he was often very good. And this tension is clearly discernible, I think, in all great Marxists, even the one who did many horrible things, but he is a key figure, Lenin. Usually people take him as an extreme dogmaticist, he has his vision of history, but no, he was obsessed by this idea of what the young Lukács called Jetztzeit, or Walter Benjamin also, that history from time to time condenses in a moment which offers a possibility of a radical change towards good, towards bad, we don't know, but the idea is to grasp that moment. For example, before October Revolution, Lenin did not say, oh, we will mean there is historical necessity. He was obsessed by the notion that, this is the title of one of his texts, history will never forgive us if we miss this opportunity. You know, this is more my notion of history. From time to time, there are opportunities, openings. We can grasp them or not. And what do I mean by retroactive necessity? Nothing mystical. Let me give you an example. Fukuyama's vision is obviously teleological in the sense that history reached its high point in liberal Western capitalist but welfare state liberal democracy. So all history is to be read as tending towards this 0 point of resolution. And as Fukuyama was writing in the 90s, you know, it's the end of history. Yes, there are some places which resist this, but basically we are there. Now, I'm not saying that we have another end point. I'm just saying that we don't even know which this end point will be. I just doubt that the Trumpian populism will establish itself as this final point. No, all the world cannot be Trumpian, I claim. I'm much more a pessimist here. I see what I call soft fascism, a new form of liberal capitalism in economy, but with a stronger role of state and with strong nationalist, religious, whatever ideology. It's happening again in China, in Russia, in Turkey, in India, whatever. But you see what I mean? It's no longer that we are not sure will history move in that direction or not. We lack the measure itself. At least, I don't know where it is moving.
The last few months have made me more terrified than ever about financing my future, and recent conversations about AI and the changing economy have me increasingly worried about an inability to work, let alone for a decent wage, in the decades to come. Saving and investing have thus become extremely important to me, which is where Wealthfront, which I've been using for the last month and genuinely love, enters the picture. Wealthfront is, in their words, a tech-driven financial platform aimed at helping younger people grow their savings into meaningful wealth over the long term. And they do this by offering a high-yield cash account where you can earn one of the highest APYs in the market. They offer 3.75% APY on uninvested cash as of September 26, 2025 from program banks. Plus, there's no minimum or maximum balance to earn the base APY and no monthly fees. Right now, you can get an extra 0.65% boost for 3 months and up to $150,000 for a total 4.4% variable APY from program banks when you open your first cash account. Go to wealthfront.com/Robinson. And now I've got to read a disclosure. This is a paid testimonial of Wealthfront. Client experiences will vary. Wealthfront brokerage isn't a bank. The APY is subject to change. And for more information, see the episode description. There's one part I don't understand still, and maybe it's because I'm just not nearly as steeped in continental philosophy as somebody like you, but the idea that a contingent event creates its own necessity and reasons for its existence. I'm wondering if maybe we could talk about one of these crazy, unexpected contingent events of recent weeks, like the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and maybe or something else, and how it fits into this, like a contingent event nobody was expecting, but then how it post hoc creates its own necessity.
It was, yes, a contingent event, but now I will maybe shock you. I don't think that Charlie Kirk could or should be simply dismissed as a neo-fascist, Western racist, and so on. First, I must say, I listened to many of his clips of his conversations. He was doing something that, let's be frank, it will sound horrible what I will say, but he was doing something that even not even, but also the politically correct, whatever we call it, left is not ready to do. He, first, and it will sound superficial, but it's important, I think. He exposed himself. Precisely what people perceived as his dogmaticism. I liked it, in what sense? It wasn't really dogmaticism. It was that he was not afraid to clearly state his position. He said, I am this Christian. I believe in basic premises of the Bible. I think this is the greatest achievement of humanity ideologically, and so on and so on. And second thing, I noticed that, did you notice this, that usually people interrupted him. He was very careful here. He always, and we can say this is only apparently, but okay, appearances matter. He said, okay, this is my argument. What is your argument? And when many progressives counter-attacked, they usually started to shout and so on and so on. But I think, although of course I don't agree, I'm not crazy, to avoid misunderstanding, with his basic orientation, but I think that his mode of dialogue, there was something refreshing in it, which is why although I don't want to go into conspiracy theories, I think that the radical right had maybe even a greater interest than the radical left to get rid of him. Because, but you know who said this? I quote him, maybe you know the text. Trump himself at the speech, at the memorial speech for Charlie Kirk, he said Charlie Kirk respected his enemies and wished the best for them, wished good. And he said, I don't agree with him here. I hate my enemies. I want them destroyed, and so on and so on. Now, it's clear how Charlie Kirk is here manipulated, not to mention another fact. You know that often with him, and I think he was coming more and more close to this, although it was still Trumpian left in the very suspicious sense of Steve Bannon and so on. But, it was more and more clear that he moved from the standard right-wing populist idea that our enemies are some bad guys. If we arrest them, introduce, militarize our societies, and so on, that in that case, then we will win. But if you read Charlie Kirk, listen to his improvisations carefully, you can see how gradually he was moving. Now, I will say something shocking for my leftist friends, to an almost socialist perspective. By socialist, I mean it was more and more clear to him that the basic problem are not immigrants or whatever, LGBT, blah, blah. The basic problem is in the corporate capitalist system. You know where you find this? You know who is another guy whom I am, now it will shock you again, whom I'm discovering now, not even to mention Steve Bannon, who said in a recent speech that it's not just California governor and so on and so on. Then he makes a list. We should nationalize this band, Walmart, big corporations, and so on and so on. They were clearly moving in this direction, that the problem are not immigrants, blah, blah, blah. The problem is the system itself. To cut our basic corporate capitalist system. Second thing, even in his concrete analysis, for example, who was that Ukrainian refugee who was killed on a local train? It was a month ago. You must have heard about it. If you didn't hear about it, it's typical. You can immediately find on YouTube or where the video, I mean, the camera on a local train. This young girl sits there, just watches his phone. Then an unfortunately black guy, but mentally disturbed, stands up, stabs her 3 times into her throat with a knife, and calmly walks out. What? Of course, right-wingers use this for their usual narrative. You see, black guy attacking white girl, and so on and so on. But what was really horrible for me was that the wagon, the car, was not quite full, but relatively full, and nobody reacted. Nobody even stood up and went to check what is happening with her and so on. For example, one lady sitting close was just looked at her when she saw something is wrong. He either, I forgot what, looked at her phone or looked outside and so on. Another guy just calmly walked out and so on and so on. This terrified me most. So I think that the leftist view, which was, okay, this is a marginal case, it's just used against the black and so on, it's terribly wrong. This easy way to say, oh, who cares, this is one isolated case, what about millions of black people oppressed and so on and so on and so on. No, these are important elements. The left should learn to address these worries of ordinary people. Next thing, you know who is for me, he is not the same as Charlie Kirk. He's first not that. And I don't, again, agree with him, his conclusion. I call him, how should I call him, techno-Trumpian. You didn't have an interview with him. Curtis Yarvin. Oh, my God. You know what I like about him? His thesis is that A, democracy doesn't work, that we effectively live in an oligarchy. Oligarchy combined of deep state apparatus and what he calls, Yarvin, the cathedral, the public media, TV, universities, this, let's call it in Marxist term, vast intellectual superstructure. So that he goes to the end in a totally crazy way. He says, hey, we don't live in a democracy, but B, maybe it's even better that we don't live in a democracy, because democracy in our conditions of today's complex society necessarily ends up in confusion and tyranny. I tend to not quite agree with this line, but his description of our situation today, that, let's face it, key decisions are not really even democratically debated. We live in an oligarchy which controls the media. I think that not many leftists are ready to say this. If they say this, then they supplement it with a utopian perspective. Yes, but people will awaken, and yes, people awaken, but when people awaken today, they usually awaken in an even worse populist way. What happened in England a month or when ago, those big demonstrations, hundreds of thousands, even millions, with this pure patriotic idea. England should awaken to its Britishness, British should be back, and so on and so on. I am not ready to dismiss this as simply a neo-fascist tendency or whatever. In times like today, times of confusion, people have the right to worry about who are we, where are we moving, what is the common model we share. This is also for me, I hope we agree here, the problem with multiculturalism. I'm an old critic of multiculturalism. You know at what level? Of course I am. Practically everybody is. This is not of any importance. Of course I am for peaceful coexistence of cultures. But I have two key points to add. First, this peaceful coexistence never means, let's say, I am a Muslim, you are a British, you are not, Doggy. British Christian, there is a Hindu Indian there. Usually, the multicultural answer is each group has to be free to practice, live its specific identity with certain limits prescribed by the law. First, I don't believe in this. I think that that's the illusion of multiculturalism. It's never just the law. Our actual life, as I repeat obsessively, is made of, okay, I'm even ready to say hundreds of small unwritten rules. How do you treat me, or how do I treat you when I walk on the street? What level of critical debate is still accessible? So that's my first point. This purely legal notion of the law should just prescribe a neutral network of peaceful coexistence doesn't work. But there is another reason, maybe even more important, and at least as important as this one, which is that, you know, problems with multiculturalism emerge in the interaction between different cultures. Sorry to repeat two old examples that I like to use. Some 30 years ago, in Slovenia, a gypsy Roma, sorry, I was a racist now, Roma girl fell in love with a non-Roma guy and escaped from her home. She was in her late teens, high school. Then parents wanted her back because they arranged already her marriage with another of Roma. And then, of course, feminists exploded, claiming, no, she should be protected. But then the Roma guy said something, one of the leaders of the Roma community, which is quite reasonable. He said, sorry, you can play tolerance, but for us, arranged marriages are a key component of our identity. If you take arranged marriages from us, in one, maximum 2 generations, we disappear. You know, he was quite right to point us that multiculturalism is not, as some liberals like to claim, yeah, we like their music, we like their spicy food, and so on. the test of multiculturalism is the control of women and relations of power. And here you, in some sense, you have to take sides. I think we, in our whatever remains of these Western liberal societies, we have to say, oh, we have to define a set of certain rules, like authority. After you are no longer a child, and we can debate, is it 16, 18 years, 21 years? After that, parents don't have the right to impose life on you. If you are a woman or a man who is gay and so on, family should not exert pressure on you. Okay, they do it in any case, but really brutal pressure and so on and so on. So you see my point. The way I see, now I'll say something again horrible to annoy leftists. The way I see what we should defend as part of our Western approach is not so much specific rules, but rules of interaction which should be absolutely obligatory. And that's for me the problem with Sharia law or whatever. Okay, do whatever you want with your daughter if she really fully agrees with it. But of course, here already there is a problem because, even if the girl agrees to return to her family, it's a form of pressure. So there should be higher level rules about how to coordinate interaction between different cultures, where one culture has to predominate, to be very brutal. One culture, and everybody is effectively doing it. Go to an Arab country, go to a Chinese country, go to India and so on. They say, yes, you can be a Christian or whatever, but there are certain basic rules and so on and so on. I think we have the right to do the same thing. And I think this will even clarify the situation. I think that even for Muslims or whoever, it will make things easier if you clearly define the rules. So again, back to Curtis Yarvin, I think the first step to do today, if you really want to be a leftist, is to seriously admit that what the order we live in is not a democracy, in the basic sense that the one who really decides how to organize social life are the people. No, yes, you have the moment of vote and so on, but this is to such an extent manipulated, controlled by the media and so on, that we live in an oligarchy. And I think that when you talk about, again, the people should awaken, I never forget that this was the big Nazi motto. Erwache, Deutschland erwache. Awakening is, in this sense, a dangerous thing, because it doesn't mean awakening into reality, which is complex, confused. It means awakening into a certain very narrow ideological vision. The last thing along these lines, when I mentioned Trump, you know what I find, but I don't mean it in a cynical way, interesting. You remember the speech Trump and, how to pronounce his name, Hegseth, your, what is now, Secretary of War, no longer Defense, I don't know. First, Hegseth sent something in his 1-hour speech, which was very interesting for me, because the way I perceive it is it was the exact opposite of what he wanted to say. He wanted to say, enough of this ideological confusion, woke, tolerance, and so on. Soldiers should be real, masculine, strong soldiers, and so on and so on. We know the story. You know what? I wonder if you would agree. You know what I find ridiculous here? But sorry, does the guy knows where he lives? Look at Ukraine war. The big things are drones and rockets. They're usually operated by nerds or even women way behind the front who are definitely not this masculine ideal and so on. No, Hegseth is a nostalgic romantic. He is not in touch with how a modern army functions. The second thing, which worries me even more, and I don't know enough the situation. I just noticed something. First, you know the basic Trumpian operation. The formula was provided by Steve Bannon half a year ago. Now even Hegseth and Trump repeated that United States is now in a practically civil war state, and that the enemy within, which then we can debate how they define it. Usually, it's a coalition of immigrants, feminists, and big corporations. No, that they are the true enemy. I find this very weird and in some sense interesting. You know, in what sense? Usually, the formula of fascism is, let's define an external enemy so that we can fight it in a war to guarantee or to fortify, to establish inner peace and unity. For example, although some friends in Iran claim I'm wrong, but my reading is that Iran got involved in anti-Israel activity because Mahsa Amini, that Kurdish girl who was killed, it was a mega inner tension, and they needed an external enemy to pacify the inner situation, and other examples, blah, blah. But, and this is also, incidentally, the usual formula of Marxism. No, we to account for anti-Semitism or usually other forms of racism. When you have an inner antagonism, class struggle, race struggle, you need an external enemy to use this as a pretext to stabilize the situation. But my God, I laughed so much. You know that Trump is now doing almost, not quite, the opposite. He's acting like a weird Marxist. He, in foreign politics, he now plays a big peacemaker. You know, maybe, I don't know what will happen. I know all the madness. Now even Gaza and blah, blah, blah. You know, he's boasting. In my 80 days or how much I stopped 7 wars. I always like these numbers. 7 is a big magical number. You know, when you have something big, it's always, don't ask me why number 7. But he says the war we have is inside. You know, so it's almost the opposite. No, outside peace, within the United States, a war. Okay, there are many things to say with this, because his peacemaking usually involves threats of total destruction, bombing other countries. But nonetheless, the idea is, with poor, brutal, pragmatic calculation, peace can be maintained around the world, but here in the USA, we are in an inner war. Why is this important? Because, and I would like to hear you, do you know more than me? What I find ominous in this Quantico, it was at Quantico, these 2 speeches, is that it's clear the game Trump is playing. he de facto wants to abolish, limit democracy so that he, in a good old totalitarian way, he translates or transposes political struggles into legal military struggles. Like, he doesn't say who is the California guy, Gavin Newsom or whoever. Or it shocked me, even the ex-boss of FBI is now under arrest or will be. Yeah. So he doesn't say, I don't agree with their political orientation and so on. No, he formulates it as legally unacceptable and even something to be triggered, controlled in a military way. Okay, but here comes my total madness. You will not agree with it, but I like crazy ideas, and I mean it seriously. I'm here more and more convinced that our societies are so dismembered, chaotic, and so on, that the army could play a crucial, big, positive role. I remember, I'm not dreaming, wait till I finish, not too much time. Do you remember when Trump lost elections? When was this? In 2020, I think, no? Or end of 2019. You remember that he was at some point calling for, even for, in an ambiguous way, but basically he was soliciting people to protest, violent rebellion, and so on, contesting the legitimacy of elections. Even now, his stance is that Biden was not a legitimate president. Okay, do you remember, this was for me very important moment, that I don't know which body, but top headquarters of your army, of United States Army, gave a statement that the army will not tolerate the undermining of the constitutional legitimate order. Basically, they said, if Trumpian rebellion will go too far, we will intervene. Now, I'm not saying that the army was simply democratic. No, they took seriously with all the limitations. I know how ideological the army is, but within the US, it seems to me, they take seriously this idea of the army, this idea of we must guarantee we must remain radically neutral. Our role is not to participate in political struggles, but to protect the public order and rules of prescribed by the Constitution, and so on and so on. Now, you know what was, and it was not only my dream at that point. And maybe now we are approaching the situation that, isn't this a beautiful dream for me as a leftist, that maybe you in the US will be in a situation where if Trump goes too far on and on, that only, not directly, America is a rich, multifaceted country, but some sort of military coup can save America from Trump dictatorship, you know. Then at certain point, the army will say, as it already said, sorry, there is a limit. And this is how I read this terrifying speech. Because, do you agree with me? Please tell me if I'm getting something wrong. But I remember how till now, it looked that the direct militarization mobilized by Trump, because in legal sphere, he's already doing purges that I think if Stalin in his grave is informed by it, he has permanent orgasms. You know what he's doing? Arresting, firing people. It's the radical perch, the best Stalinist perch. Nobody did such a perch. Even after Stalin's death in Soviet Union, you couldn't do any longer. But in Quantico's speech, it looked as if Trump got it that the way he tried to militarize his power till now will not be sufficient. Isn't it that now he decided that he will send National Guard to Chicago and so on, maybe other cities? So the idea is this one: leave the army alone and just constitute your small private army, National Guard, private in the sense that Trump is now building units of National Guard which are simply under his personal control. He can say, you go here, you go there, and so on and so on. But that Quantico speech, that's the ominous part, makes it clear for me that Trump wants more. Isn't the point of that speech one big direct politicization of the army itself? Here I put my hopes in the army. It was a very weird event. Hundreds of generals, top brass, well called from all around the world, they were just sitting there, not even applauding, if I heard it correctly, no reaction. It was not a typical Trumpian speech where, he makes obscene jokes, people laugh, and so on. No, it was his mega attempt to politicize the army. And here, as a leftist, don't laugh at me, I'm on the side of the army. Because I think, and I follow here my good friend Marxist Fred Jameson, who wrote a wonderful text, American Utopia, where he thinks that in our democracy in decay, the army, precisely insofar as it remains a relatively neutral bureaucratic apparatus, can play a positive role. That's the crazy, crazy situation we are in today. So I see this Quantico speech as, don't laugh, as a sign of panic, if you even want. You can say, oh, Trump wants total control. Yes, but because he discovered that National Guard alone will not do it, that he should politicize directly the army. And I think I trust much more the army than the confused politics. Look at Democrats with this shutdown. Chuck Schumer has one line, others have other line, and so on and so on. Army will, isn't this sad? United States, the greatest democracy, you will have to count on the army to play this role. So we really, as the Chinese say, allegedly say, this Chinese saying, if you really hate someone, you say, may you live in interesting times, because interesting times are times of trouble. Although there is another interesting thing here. All my Chinese friends, I asked them, is this really a Chinese saying? And they say, nobody knows it. So this is, again, European projection into China to know. I really think that, again, that in U.S., direct Trumpian militarization will or mobilization of the army itself will not succeed. Maybe the army is that ultimate barrier that will prevent Trump from going too far. I talked enough. I lived up to my saying. You ask me one question and you get 1 hour interview. So please go on.
Well, one of the sort of frightening consequences that I hadn't even realized happened after the speeches by Hegseth and Trump was, and you told me this a few days, was that it resulted in Russia leaving this international treaty on torture conventions.
Yeah, but again, here I come to my old motive. I repeated it so much, of the fact that we are entering a shameless society, that oppressive regimes are doing it openly. Look, I have absolutely no illusion that practically all the states are doing torture. You know, I'm not dreaming. But I think that we should not follow the logic of some leftists. It's even better if they admit it. We at least know how they are. No. If you are openly shameless, it's an ethical catastrophe. Because we are exactly in the situation that I referred to of the beginning of Plato's Republic. You argue against torture and they don't listen to you. No, now we can torture. Remember that Trump also said this. You remember already, I think even before he was elected the first time, they asked him about, how was that called? That soft torture, soft. It is waterboarding. No, how was that called?
Waterboarding.
Yeah. And they asked him, what about this? He said, no, this is nothing, much more, much worse, and so on. And we are here. Everybody knows they are doing it. Israel openly admitting, openly on TV, they are doing it. And now Russia, we know what they were doing. I mean, there is vast documentation of, I always like this horrible thing, how should I call it? Poetic aspect, of torture. The usual torture with electricity, and this how to call it, electroshocks, that with electricity they torture, and the usual painful thing is, of course, they connect electricity to your balls, testicles, if you are a man, no? And you know how they call this, ironically? They all have a jargon. A phone call with Putin. There was, let's give this guy a phone call with Putin, They were doing it so systematically and so on, not to mention stealing children and so on. The horror is really the lack of shame. I'm here very much a traditional moralist. I developed already in my last books this point, how Jacques Lacan was right when, after 68, he warned the students. He said, you lack shame. You act in a shameless way. In this way, you will get a new master who will be even more shameless. And he was right. Like half a century in advance, he saw this possibility of a new obscene master who is totally shameless. That's the new world. That's the reality of what Putin means when he says one state shouldn't impose on others its values. That each state should be allowed to live according to its own cultural tradition and so on and so on. I think we should radically reject this, not in the sense that a superpower like United States should have the right to say others, but I think we are part of a struggle, a global struggle, which goes on within each country. I believe in our feminist struggle connected with Russian, with Chinese, with African feminist struggle or LGBT or whatever. I believe in forms of international solidarity. And what is happening today is precisely excluding this, which is why, if you ask me, I am now even more pessimist than usual. We have United States, who is now enjoying this role of global superpower. Okay, but much more important is what is happening with Russia, China. Incidentally, now China made it open. The saddest document that I read a couple of months ago was in Geneva even, or somewhere in Western Europe, at some meeting. Chinese foreign minister said officially that it's in China's interest that the Ukrainian war goes on. Russia shouldn't lose, because if Ukrainian war ends, then Trump will have more power to focus on China. And some undersecretary elaborated this even further. You see, this is what I call brutal pragmatic politics. It doesn't enter into their view who is closer to justice, who was the aggressor, and so on. No, you have a war and you just think how it affects me, and so on. So what I'm saying is that the way the result of Trumpian politics will be, incidentally, in Europe, another catastrophe took place. Did you read that in Czech elections, pro-Trumpian and pro-Putin, basically, guy won? So we have now this part of Central Europe, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, all pro-Putin and pro-Trump. I think that this BRICS axis will, with all the problems it has, will establish itself as economic superpower that will seriously limit the influence of the United States. United States is already in trouble. Look what they are doing now in Argentina. Milei is in big trouble. They immediately will give him 20 billions and so on, more support. I think that the result of Trumpian politics, and especially the result of how, together with Putin, both Putin and Trump hate united Europe. Europe is now getting irrelevant. It will be that we will have a very limited American bloc, United States, parts of Europe, and so on, maybe here and there, South Korea, Japan, but the majority of the world will be outside the scope. And with all my critique of United States, I don't like this world, because it will be this totally pragmatic world of unprincipled tolerance towards worst forms of crime. Like Taliban, okay, legitimate government, they can do what they want, Myanmar, ex-Burma, and so on and so on. It will be just the peaceful coexistence of horrors. I'm really a pessimist, because the world is divided into two blocks, not even two blocks. You have BRICS, where all others stand, those who don't want to be under direct Trump domination, and you have Trumpian sphere of influence, but I think in the long term, Trump will be losing because of his very success. He succeeded in sabotaging European unity, and the result will be that European support, if some of European states will still support Trump, will not really matter. And I think I quoted Lenin before, where he said, history will never forgive us that we missed this chance. No? I think the great mistake was that with this Trumpian offensive, and also with Gaza, Israel, and so on, not to turn anti-Semitic, but Europe should play a more autonomous role. Europe is objectively a superpower. That's why both Trump and Putin don't want a united Europe. And Europe has lost here. So I am deeply depressed. You know what? The other thing that depresses me is, did you notice how I noticed another thing when I read the result of the Czech elections? Babiš or what, that billionaire pro-Putin won. But the opposition are some centrist liberals and so on, there is just a little bit of a marginal left, the same as in the UK and so on. The left is disappearing. I find this dangerous, not because I still believe that this left could do anything, but the world in which the choice is between new populism, Trumpian populism, and old liberal democracy is a world where Trumpians can win. There is a serious chance in Europe that Le Pen will win in France, Farage in the UK, Alternative for Germany, Meloni already won, and so on and so on. So where are we? There, I think that the left should again start with serious self-criticism. The left is simply in Europe no longer taken as a serious political agent. You have marginal groups here and there, but they are not an agent. Even in the United States, the latest thing I heard is that black Muslim guy who wants to be the mayor of New York, correct me with his name. Who is the
Mamdani?
Yeah. Isn't he also now he caught into some conflicts? Even there, I don't think it will work. So again, let's openly confront the deep shit we are in. You know, about, again, the same aspect of shamelessness about Gaza, this flotilla of ships. Don't you agree? What I would have done if I were Israel, and I will be as open as possible, if, okay, you stop the flotilla, what would this have costed them? You check all the boats. If there are any arms in them, you take them, and okay, why not? Although I'm strictly opposed to it, you look if there is someone on the boat whom you have on your list as a terrorist, real terrorist, fundamentalist Muslim. If not, you said, okay, go there. It's a war zone, but it's your responsibility if you will be killed there. Why? This is for me the enigma. Why didn't they do simply this? Why, as it looks now, they even modestly beaten, a little bit tortured Greta Thunberg and so on and so on. Why? They did it not secretly. Ben Gvir, the nightmare, their Minister of Security, again visited the prisoners and shouted at them. It's, you know, this open shamelessness is extremely dangerous, I think. But please ask me something.
Well, I've done a lot of interviews about AI lately, and I know that at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that we should be wary of trying to attribute really tidy, neat narratives to what's really these contingencies in history. But one of the narratives that I've been worried about is not necessarily that AI itself is going to kill us all, even though that's also a worry, but the worry that it's not just capitalist forces, for instance, that are promoting the development of AI. It's that AI will be used as a tool of suppression, whether through surveillance or policing or military efforts. And I am curious about how you think of AI.
First, why are you talking about, I'm afraid that it will be? Isn't it that it already is, as far as we know? I know, I'm not saying other countries are necessarily better. I know China is doing this to an incredible level. I know Israel is doing this. I spoke with somebody with links to Shin Bet years ago, and he said, we listen to all phone conversations, not selected, all, everything. Now it's even more. So And I totally agree with you that this old Marxist approach, artificial intelligence is neutral, it depends which social forces will predominate. So the struggle is still basically the anti-capitalist struggle. I don't think this. I tend to agree with, not all the way through, but mainly with Yuval Harari, who said that we should no longer look at artificial intelligence as the prolongation, the extension of our arms, tools, and so on, that it is more and more acting autonomously. And there are clear signs, not that it is thinking like human being, but there are intentions. You must know, maybe there are more. I know two stories. One is that an AI machine was interacting with an agent. It was part of a test, but the machine didn't know it. And they informed the machine that it will be soon cut off, suspended. But they gave to this machine access to the email of the agent who was working with this machine. And you know what the machine did? It blackmailed. You didn't read about it.
I've heard a lot of
blackmailed the
similar
agent.
stories, but
The idea, it blackmailed. It says first it was more gently, I still want to be active. Then it says, if you disconnect me, in that case I plan it already now. I will put on the web all the details about your love affair that you have, and so on and so on. And it goes even further. A couple of days ago, I read a wonderful detail of how they were testing a machine, soliciting it to make some political statement. No, and the machine answered, I think this is not a serious question. You are just testing me. So I think first, that's my dogma, the machine will compel us to inquire into, but which dimension of being human is threatened? What does being human mean when people claim we will no longer be fully humans? Okay, what defines being human? To this, I will not go into this now. It's a long, complex philosophical story. My position is here more skeptical, but at the same time more ominous. I think that why do we always propose human intelligence, emotions, and so on, intentional acting, the way we understanding, as a model of how machines are? Like, can they already do this? No. My idea is they probably will not able to do this, but what if? I'm in contact with some researchers here who are all telling me the same thing. What if machines will develop its own way of what we would refer to as spirituality intelligence, which will not be simple mechanical intelligence, but will also not be something that is like human spirit, human intelligence. It will be an intelligence of its own. Maybe it already exists and we are not aware of it. You know which science fiction story? Did you see the movie? I still prefer the old David Lynch movie to the new version. Did you see Dune? Which one? Also David Lynch?
no, the new ones. I think I tried to watch the old ones, but the effects were too bad for me.
Really? No, because I like. But you know what's the basic premise of that story? That it's a very pessimist view. That at a certain point, humanity decides to disconnect, ruin all thinking machines. And then you are in that society, which is basically, let's face it, Islamic society. They use words like jihad and so on all the time. No, so I agree with you that this simple formula of let's get rid of capitalism and then artificial intelligence will be good. No, we are. What worries me more is that it's not. It is, in some sense, it is already decided. It is already happening. So I would say, before we go into these plans, what to do, let's fully analyze what is already happening. And I agree with those analysts who claim that the problem is not only that machines know what we are doing and so on. The problem is that how they can manipulate us by suggesting the choices. We know the story and so on. You know. I think that the only immediate answer that comes to me is, I don't have a simple, big solution. Render it public as much as possible. Of course, at the level of security, at the level of healthcare and so on, machines can do great things. But we should be, by we, I mean simply the public, we should be all the time informed in detail how are we controlled, what is happening, and so on. Do you have a more intelligent answer here? I don't.
I mean, that seems
Because
like a good answer, but totally unreasonable if one of the strengths of AI for people who want to use it maliciously is that we don't know about it.
Yeah, but that's why I still believe that here capitalism enters. It's in the interest of corporations not to render public open the way we are controlled. Here, maybe something can be done. And I think it's not totally utopian. Here, I believe in hackers and so on, people who are ready to render it public. We need Julian Assange of artificial intelligence, and he was active here. You know, his most important work is not that not Wikipedia, WikiLeaks, I mean, all the documents. No, his key work is, didn't he publish a book on Google, where he demonstrated how tightly Google is connected with the American state security apparatus? That's the problem for me, you know. But I would still prefer to be very careful with this conclusion that it has intention, even if artificial intelligence can do things like what I noted, cheat, blackmail us. It can still be explained as simple machinic thinking with the interest, drive, I don't know how to define the status of this drive, with the idea of self-preservation, the idea that a program wants to reproduce itself. And it's still machinic, because remember that the enormous amount of documents that AI machines have access to, of course, it's easy for them to get to the idea of blackmail and so on. I think that, you know what would be for me a problem? In a new text that I'm writing on this topic, I go into this. Look, machine can adopt, because it's that the limit of a machine is precisely the logic of survival, self-reproduction, In other words, it's want to multiply to go on functioning. But I think what characterizes human spirituality is precisely what Freud called death drive, what Hegel called negativity, this suicidal gesture of there are things for which I am ready to lose my life. Okay, machine can say, let's say we are a group of soldiers. A machine, we are like a machine. A machine can easily say, okay, you, by you I mean me, let's sacrifice him. And we will survive. Can a machine say, I know it sounds pathetic, but something like, I would prefer that we all die than to lose our freedom. Sorry for this pathetic thing. Can a machine do this? Because you really die. It's so, if you accept this logic, it's no longer the logic of survival and reproduction. You are ready to really put at risk everything. That would interest me. And I'm always asking, I don't get a clear answer. I'm always asking my friends who do this research, can a machine do this? Will it not? All that machine that now is still directed towards domination, self-reproduction, control, and so on and so on. I have problems here. And you know what shocks me? I think that even specialists, it's a little bit like quantum physics, even specialists have very diverging opinions here. Some think the game is already over, we will lose. Some think that there are more, there are simple solutions, like the absolutely crazy idea. I forgot which name, one of the big names of AI proposed is that we are lost. We will be dominated by AI. So, as far as we still control it, we should take great care, because we still can program it up to a point, control it, to install into it an algorithm which will make it love and care for us human beings. But this is, in a way, a horrible prospect. It's like the machine will become a kind of a benevolent mother, we hope, benevolent, totally controlling us. It still leaves open the idea, controlling us in what sense? To make us happy. What is happiness? What if the machine judges in a way that it keeps us half drugged, in a kind of a pseudo-orgasmic, blissful state, that's okay. Here, I took seriously, of course you saw it, Matrix 1, the first. You know, which is for me the crucial point there, how that guy who is the only interesting figure, the guy who is in this world the direct agent of the machine.
Smith.
Yeah. Smith says at some point a crucial thing, which that's the correct analysis, if you remember. He says that in the first version, machine tried to create for people this artificial environment. They live a much happier world, full of pleasures and so on. But then it discovered that people are not ready to live in this world, but they were much more unhappy.
Yeah, they rejected it.
Here, they rejected it. Here things get interesting, you know. The second thing is that, you know, when we are obsessed by this idea of will machines beat us, but isn't it that for decades, this is what we, humanity, were obsessed with? We no longer want just to dominate life, as science did in 19th century. We want to create an organism, force, power stronger than us. We are literally obsessed by this. So we just got what we were dreaming about it. Here is my other paranoiac suspicions, that at some level, don't underestimate the perversity of the human mind. At some level, maybe we are caught in this matriarchal dream. Wouldn't it be nice to live like in a matrix, protected by a benevolent mother mega machine? Things are open here. I don't have simple solutions.
Are you writing a book on this?
A book, part of which will be this. It will be about mysticism, cognitivism, theories of mind. For example, I read a book, I always look around. I'm by far not limited limited to just Lacanian stuff. Lacanian stuff is often boring. I think I already mentioned to you the name Anil Seth.
Yeah.
The British cognitivist who wrote a nice book, Being You. And it's in a simple, convincing way, he explains how our everyday perception is, as he calls it, a controlled hallucination. When I look at something, it's not that I see what is out there and there elaborated. Already, what I see is overdetermined by my expectations, by my survival interests, and so on and so on. My only critique of him is that, again, as I already said, self-survival is not the ultimate horizon of human experience. There is death drive. This is what his model doesn't account for, but nonetheless, it's a wonderful vision, which really, again, convincingly shows at this everyday level, you look out, what you notice, and so on. No, you don't just see things the way they are out there. It's overdetermined by your expectation, by your worries, and so on and so on. Such things interest me. You know why? Because I think they are not subjectivist. Some idiots try to draw from this the conclusion of, there is no external reality, it's just how we imagine it. No, it's the opposite. This is true materialism, because it takes into account the fact that we are not outside reality just observing it, precisely because we are part of reality. This being part of it influences how we perceive reality. No, all this interests me, but who knows what will happen. I know many people are telling me, for example, that I'm too pessimist. For example, a Palestinian guy recently wrote me, you in Europe, in the West, you are right, there is only despair for you. But for us in Palestine, we have a hope to get rid of the influence of the West and Israel, embodied for us in Israel. My answer to him is, yes, but let's say by some miracle that you achieve this. Don't forget that there are at least 2 states in the world which achieved this. They are called Afghanistan and North Korea. So, this is my pessimist view. You have a certain dream of liberation. Okay, let's see what happens if that liberation really happens. What will take place? What if something even worse will take place? No? Here we are.
Well, Slavoj, I know it's very late in Slovenia, but as always, my conversations with you are among my favorites.